Conservatoire de Musique et d'Art Dramatique, majoring in clarinet, while also a philosophy major at McGill. The matinée symphonique at which I played a movement of Mozart's clarinet concerto was in Ottawa, convenient for my family, who had moved there from Montreal while I was finishing high school, leaving me in care of my grandparents so I could graduate with my class and continue my musical studies. The previous March, I had performed on clarinet in the Sarah Fisher recital series at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal, sharing the program, as I was surprised to note recently on Unearthing a Yellowed newspaper review, with celebrated pianist André Laplante, also then 17. Together, these two events constituted my musical debut, standard first steps in Montreal at the time for a young professional track musician. For such I had somehow, willy-nilly, become. Performing as soloist with the MSO, a professional orchestra, should have been major for me, a milestone moment. I don't remember it that way. The event was colored by disappointment from the start, with my matinee scheduled anomalously in Ottawa. Montreal had a dazzling new concert hall. Ottawa's National Arts Centre was in its last year at the old Capitol Theatre, a venue designed for cinema and vaudeville. I would miss out on the thrill of playing in Place des Arts, and all my friends were in Montreal. In a daze of nerves through the performance itself, I came off stage with a palpable sense of letdown, hyper-aware of every glitch, every passage that hadn't come off as well as it could have. It felt like a missed chance. In the wings, my parents and excited younger siblings were waiting, unaware that I had not given the performance I'd hoped to. Also waiting were a photographer and a female arts reporter from the Ottawa Journal, who wanted to talk about my studies in philosophy, my prospects as a woman wind player. Things that struck me as irrelevant to the moment, prompting irrelevancies in reply. Soon after, in company of the orchestra, I boarded a train to return to Montreal. The symphony musicians, in those years nearly all men, settled down with newspaper sports sections and decks of cards. Some dozed off. This was all in a day's work for them. No one seemed interested in engaging with the clarinet soloist, whose moment in the sun seemed to be over. Fidgety in my seat as the train lurched homeward, I hatched an idea for a short story I could write. A deeply conflicted young musician realizes, in the immediate aftermath of her debut, that she cannot continue on this path. Suddenly, with a stab of grief, she knows that her debut will prove to be her swan song. I saw I could use some of the details of the train ride. The character could have this flash insight on the train. Of course, the story wasn't about me, I reassured myself. I was only stepping into this character's shoes. I was committed to a life in music. I had been playing principal clarinet in the Conservatoire orchestra since the age of 15, a position conferred on me after a mere 2 years on the instrument. There would be many more chances to perform as soloist with an orchestra, and they would be different. Was I fooling myself, or was I prescient? Though I continued on the path for another 4 years, long enough to graduate from the Conservatoire with a concours premier prix in performance on clarinet, in essence my debut was my swan song. For most of my adult life I've been a word person, a poet, writer, and literary editor, for 20 years a college English teacher. I have always been a word person. I began writing stories and poems almost as soon as I could hold a pencil. But music was central to my formative years, and for nearly a decade I entertained a notion that I could one day support a writing habit by playing clarinet in an orchestra. My mother's sage advice that I take an academic degree concurrently with my Conservatoire studies so as to have something to fall back on was to be expected from a parent widowed at 27 with 2 children. The advice served me well, but failed to recognize that when one has something to fall back on, one is likely to fall back on it. Missing from this picture is the piano. Piano was my first instrument. I'd had private lessons from childhood and kept them up all through high school, even after clarinet supplanted piano as the focus of my time and attention. But I never thought of playing piano professionally. In all those years, I never played in a student recital or even took an exam. My teacher didn't believe in them. By the time I entered university at 17, piano lessons had become irregular and soon lapsed.